opposition paint you a world where it's supposed to be a utopia just in order to choose what your own job is, I don't know what world they're talking about. Because we think a world where people are allowed to choose what their career actually is one that is very realistic and one that is completely in line with the info slide. Before I move on to some rebuttal and then an argument on why they have more flexibility in their career paths, I firstly want to engage with some characterization. Because they say that it's going to be just a company that completely decides for you and that you're likely not going to have any say in this. But as the info slide says, employees are hired as generalists and move across various roles. It never says anything about having zero autonomy in this process. I think likely that it's extremely unlikely for you to have zero say in where you're going, right? There are many things such as, say you don't want to work in a certain company, right? You're going to have a say in this process. It's likely in the incentive of companies to allow you to have a say in this process because you're their employees. If they're forcing you to work in another company, the time in which you work for your employer is probably not going to be a time which you can collaborate very well with other employees, a time where you work really hard and diligently because they're stripping you of your autonomy in which you can actually choose what company you work for. I think this is a very unlikely comparative that they've painted for you. Choosing the companies that you work for is something that's very realistic and something that's very likely to happen. But firstly, before I move on to my argument on why there's greater flexibility, I want to engage with some rebuttal. Because firstly, they say that, people are going to keep on fired if you keep on messing up whatever you do. But uniquely, right? If the model isn't on our side of the house is likely to be ubiquitous and likely to apply for most people, that means that if I buy their analysis and say, sure, people are going to make mistakes, they didn't prove why some people are more likely to make mistakes than others, right? That means that if everybody's switching careers, that means according to their analysis, everybody's going to be making mistakes. And at that point, I think it's very unlikely that employers are going to fire everyone, right? Which means I don't really get the impact of their argument. But now I'm going to be proving to you as to, now that I pointed out what the clear gap in their impacts and their analysis was, I'm going to be telling you why this is very unlikely to happen in the first place. Because when you change jobs, you feel like you need to prove yourself, that is to your co-workers, to yourself, that you can do this and you can be the same as you were in your previous job. This is something new and something that you probably want to excel in as something that you did before. But notably, even if, notably also, they act like it's something that you're going to keep on switching every month or every couple of weeks. If you be in a certain job or a role for a number of years, you probably gain the skills. Maybe it takes a week or two to adapt, but I think the amount to which you make mistakes is very unlikely. But finally, I think this is outweighed by motivation, because notably you're very likely to make mistakes, as we told you in our first speech, when you're unmotivated. This is why it's a very common business concept that motivation is the route to success. This is why you have things like Maslow's hierarchy, which is the pinnacle of business, because at the top of this lies self-actualization, the idea that you have the ability to choose and shape your own career path. This is why when motivation is so important, I think when they lack this on their side of the house, by actually having the ability to choose uniquely the most important part of motivation, that is self-actualization and autonomy, I think it's very likely for you to just not care enough to make more mistakes. Even if you're a specialist, if you encounter and do the same thing again and again, maybe you have the ability to do something correct. But what's saying, why are you going to put 100% every single time? Okay, now onto my argument as to why we get greater flexibility and adaptability in the economy. Because for some framing and characterization here, in the status quo, there is significant volatility in job markets. If you look at things like the AI bubble, where companies are just funneling money into each other, if you look at, for example, automation taking jobs from entire sectors, and if you look at, for example, tariffs and trade embargoes coming from the very places which you thought stability was once a haven of, I think it's very clear that people right now are uncertain of where the market is going. Why do we solve this problem? It's because number one, we allow for more adaptability. This is because the job market and employers, there becomes a normalization of the hiring and quitting of employees. This means that the procedures regarding this, they require less administrative work. Things like on-the-job training becomes normalized. Things like introducing working procedure while you're working working on the task. Things like less paperwork required when you hire and when you quit a job. These are the types of things that overall symmetricize between companies the way in which you can hire and join another one, but also makes the whole integration process and redundancy procedures overall more seamless. This is because it's mutually beneficial for companies to do so. If I'm an accounting firm and there's a separate investment firm, it's beneficial for both of us to make the process as seamless as possible to transfer employees, because that means that I can get my employees to start working as quick as possible, and they can likely do the same. This means that we have training that happens as quick as possible and training that is as efficient as possible. Yes.
But why is quick training necessarily good? I mean, it's good that you train people in a long run so people are more educated and know more about this. I don't understand how any of what you're saying is actually good.
Yeah, but look, notably what I'm saying is specifically about getting into the job, right? On-the-job training doesn't necessarily mean that you have to rush the training process. It means that you can get to working and you can learn about the procedures as you do so. I think training is far likely to be better on our side of the house, because when you move and you learn about things, you feel like this employer actually cares about you. Because when you're a specialist in your field, you're very unlikely to get training beyond just the first time that you're there, and therefore you're less likely to feel that the company really cares about you. But then reason number two is that it just means in times of significant market change, this is really beneficial. It means that crucially, the time that it takes to train employees and switch industry and all these kinds of things is oftentimes very rushed, and that it's very financially strenuous for businesses and individuals. That is, for example, when Novo Nordisk has to fire hundreds of employees now, both in Denmark and globally, there's a more seamless process between switching to other competitors, whereas on their side of the house, you don't want employees going to competitors because this is uniquely bad for you. But this ties into the next point about cross-sector collaboration. Because when employees bring intel to their field into other ones that are closely linked, you can bring related ideas. That's to say that if you're working in a sustainable green growth company and you're trying to find the gaps in the market here, you can directly tie it in to a company where you now work in building actual solar panels or renewable energy processes. This means that not only do employees bring this, but there's a greater incentive for companies to collaborate as well, because uniquely they're going to get employees from each other. What are the impacts of this argument? It means that especially for those students, people who have gone on maternity leave, people who are otherwise unemployed, it's easier to enter the job market because there's a lower barrier to entry, because people are entering and switching around jobs, especially in the lower entry-level jobs. This also means that if a market does somewhat collapse, if there's a sudden change in it, it's easier for you to now go into a job and find one, because companies can actually detect employees that will fit their role to the highest degree, because there's more collaboration between companies. Comparatively, even if there's employees that may switch a role, it's very hard to find it because you don't know where they are, and it's very hard for you to actually find them. This means that on our side of the house, we can get a greater adaptability for employees and for businesses, especially in the times that people are the most vulnerable, and for those people that are the most vulnerable. Thank you. They made a huge strategic mistake in this debate when they just say, oh, our characterization is wrong, and fail to engage with why we actually proved why it's more likely to be the one that's more likely to exist. But also they were extremely uncomparative in this debate, and I'm going to start off the bat right with that, because they say in the US they say in Japan, right, there's huge amounts of narratives that tell you you need to leave your job, right? In this model, you have to leave your job because everybody around you is telling you to do so. I think equally on their side of the house, as I told in a POI, in the US there's a huge narrative, and as a part of this model, and a huge just incentive for you to stay in your job, whether it be your employer's telling you to stay, otherwise I'm not gonna give you an increase in your wage, or whether there's just a huge stigma to leave with your fellow employees, or things where you have to give a multiple months notice just in order to leave, or the fact that it's extremely hard to climb up the ladder when you join a separate company. All this means that on their side of the house, it's incredibly hard to leave your company as well. I think they needed to be comparative in this regard as well. But then they give a really weird response to this. They say that they tell to the millions of people who currently dislike their job that, oh, wait, aren't you supposed to choose a degree that you like in college? Notably, there's so many factors that just make this such an unstrategic response. You could just change your interest. You could not like the way that your job pans out, because notably the things that you learn in college might not be the same way it's applied in your job. Just the amount of sheer holes in this in this response is just enough to make it extremely hard for me to buy this. But then also I want to engage on this thing about mistakes, because we told you that we don't want to make mistakes on our side of the house when you join a new business or a new company, right? And they say that, oh, but this will make people really bad when they make mistakes because you didn't want to make them in the first place. Notably, they needed to listen what we told you in our first speech, because we explained with fact that you're fine with making mistakes because you've lowered your expectations. Because notably, if we engage with their example about school, sure, you're stressed about going to a new school, but or going to a new grade, but that also means that you probably don't expect, if you go to a new school, that you're going to get 100% in your next test. This means that at the same time as which you want to do well, you can also be like, okay, it's fine if I didn't achieve this to the same degree. But I also want to be comparative here, because for those who do switch, right, I think to at least some degree you can buy that they'll be able to transfer some skills, they'll be able to transfer some knowledge. But on the long term, if we do some weighing here, even if you're bad at the start, and even if you make mistakes at the start, at least you care enough to improve in the future, in the next 3 years that you work in the business. This means at the end of it, you feel more happy in yourself that before I was pretty bad, but now I'm at least decently good. So you feel comparatively way better here. On their side of the house, if we bite the bullet and say their specialist is far better, okay, but you don't feel the marginal utility here, because how much better can it really be? Maybe you get one more client to buy or sell from you. I don't think this feels so much better. But also, they can't simply assume on your side, just because you're a specialist, you're guaranteed to succeed. Because notably, even if a new graduate comes in and they do better than you, even if it's a little bit better, you feel really bad, right? You're the person who has way more experience in the company. You're the one who's supposed to be doing good. You're the one that took the option to stay, but there's still somebody doing better than you. This makes you feel incredibly bad. And then on the characterization point, they say that in Japan, people are overworked, and that's why this has to be a part of our side of the house. But notably, what's the gap in the causation and correlation? Just because Japan has this, they didn't explain as to why overworking is an ingrained part of the rotational model. They had to prove this, and I don't think they did at all. Equally on both sides of the house, I think this can exist. But finally, I want to note that you can still be, wait, what? I still have 10 seconds. Yeah. But okay, for all those reasons, I think it's clear on our side of the house that we proved that you can still be passionate and you can still earn money. Thank you.